What's up guys, it's Sam here, and in today's video we're going to be explaining what government debt is. So you may have heard in the news that the US government is about to potentially default on its debt if the two parties can't come to some arrangement to increase the debt ceiling. So you might wonder, how does government debt work? How does it work, and how does they keep getting more and more money to add on to the debt pile? Who are they borrowing from, and where does this money come from? These are kind of questions that you might ask yourself. You see that the US is 27 trillion in debt, but who is actually giving them this money? Who is letting them borrow this money, and why would they let them do that? So we're going to get into this video and hopefully give a bit of clarity to the whole situation, what's going on in the US. And remember guys, to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, it helps out an awful lot. And remember, if you want to check out any of the other socials we're on, they're all linked down below in the description. And also if you want to pick up some free Bitcoin on BlockFi or Nexo, to check out the links that are down below as well. So look, without further ado, we'll get straight into the video. So what is government debt? Government debt is used to fund things that we cannot pay for with tax revenues. So tax revenues will add up to so much, and then government debt will add up to so much. If one outweighs the other, then it's going to result in debt. So if you have a $20 billion tax revenue, but to run the country is costing you 25 billion, you're going to be borrowing 5 billion at an extremely low interest rate, depending on what kind of criteria you're given. So you could be given like a AAA rating or a AA rating or a very, very, very poor rating, and then you'll be paying a very, very high interest rate, as people see it as high risk investment. But what countries do is they borrow this money at a very, very low interest rate, so they don't put the emphasis on the people that live in the country. So if you don't want to see your taxes going up, people don't want to see that. The low-income people, the mid-income people, the rich, and also the corporations, they all don't want to see their taxes going up, but they want to see roads built, they want to see airports built, they want to see hospitals maintained, they want all this stuff without being taxed as much. So how does the government try to make everybody happy? Is by borrowing the money instead of taxing it off the people. So this is what government debt is. They're trying to basically please their citizens by borrowing the money instead of raising taxes to pay for the infrastructure that is needed. So this is what debt has gotten out of control in a lot of places. Like the highest debt to ratio is Japan. It's over 200%. We'll have a quick look towards the end of the video at different economies and their debt ratios. But the big one that's coming up in the news recently is the largest debt in the world, and that is of the US economy. So they're potentially coming close to a default on their debt, which means they won't make their interest payment. So this has never happened before in the US history, and it's just something that's going to be coming up over the next week, 2 weeks time, and people are getting pretty scared about it and wondering, will the US default of their debt, because Republicans and Democrats cannot come to an arrangement. So that is what government debt is. It's just basically what is used to run the country, and it's run basically because they can't afford to do it based on tax revenues, and they don't want to increase corporation tax and income tax on people, because it leads to unrest and people not wanting to work. They're looking to move their money elsewhere, all that kind of stuff. It's all games and games and games. So that's what government debt is, and it's just them pleasing the people to make sure all of the infrastructure is working correctly. So look guys, we're going to get straight into now why government debt exists. So why is government debt allowed to exist, you might ask? Why are people allowed to get their countries in so much debt, and why is it just continuing to be allowed to happen across the entire world? I know we spoke about people don't want to pay more taxes, they want to have all the infrastructure, they want their hospitals, they want the pensions, they want all of that done, and corporations also want the same. They want everything there for them. So what the government does, as I said, they just borrow the money instead of increasing taxation. And this leads to a happier population. But why is this allowed to happen? And how does it continue to keep happening over time? And where they get this money from is they get it from rich individuals, they get it from other countries that are willing to lend them money at a very, very low interest rate, depending on your credibility. Like, so the US would have a very, very high credibility. Germany, UK, France, they all have very high credibility. Maybe some like lower credibility countries, maybe some like maybe in like Eastern Europe, Argentina, Greece, ones that have defaulted on their debts before. So they loan them this money at an interest rate, and they try to use inflation as a way to cut into this interest, to try and bring it down over time, to bring the debt down with the inflation that they're bringing. So if the interest rate is 1%, the inflation rate is 2%, you're biting into it easier and easier and easier over time. But now we have countries that have debt that is double the worth of the country, like Japan, and Greece is not too far behind, Italy as well. The US is just gone over the total GDP to debt ratio, and it's a problem that could potentially happen, that there is a debt cycle, all people want their money back, everyone owes money everywhere, and it's just a bit of a mess. There's a couple of countries that do loan out a lot of money. Number one is China. So China actually loan out the most money to countries in the entire world, and they have this big clock in US debt and how much the US owes them over time. But that's essentially the biggest lender in the entire world is China, which obviously presents its own issues. But this is why it's allowed to happen, as people are basically profiting off government debt. They're taking their bonds at the 1% interest rate. So if you've got 100 million and you just want to buy government bonds, they'll give you the 1 million guaranteed. So like that's a pretty good deal. Like, it's a guaranteed money, and that's what a lot of these kind of hedge funds and stuff and funds would actually work in. They sell government bonds and buy them and swap them, all that kind of stuff. So that is why it's allowed to happen and why it continues. They don't want to increase taxation because it leads to an unhappy population and also unhappy corporations, which stifles innovation, stifles the economy, and we could end up in a bit of a depression. So that's why it is allowed to happen. As I mentioned earlier, the US is currently coming close to the debt ceiling. This is where they are going to go past the maximum amount of debt that was outlined in the previous time they either put it up, but it's never ever gone down. Like, so Democrats and Republicans have to come to an agreement to basically make sure that this debt is dealt with. And Republicans are against increasing the debt ceiling, while Democrats seeing as a necessary thing to try and prevent the US from defaulting on its debt. So now we're just going to take a quick look at an article that explains a bit about this. Right, so this is the article by Reuters, and this is one I just kind of picked up on, something I see what's going on quite easily. So Joe Biden says Republicans stalling on debt ceiling risks a US default. So this will be the first time in their history that the US potentially can default on their debt. And like, what a default means is that it cannot meet its obligations to pay its debt, and this could result in higher interest rates for the US and a downgrade in the US government's credit score. All of these things are extremely bad and could result in a bit of an economic collapse in the US, weakening the dollar, potentially the dollar losing its backing as the world reserve currency. So these are a couple of the fears that are going around investors' minds at the moment as this deadline becomes closer and closer. So at the moment, the US has a debt ceiling of around 28.4 trillion, which is the debt limit that is set at the moment, and they will go over that in the next 2 weeks. So they either have to extend the debt limit or they will default on their debt. So this is becoming a bit of a debate inside the government of the US, where Republicans don't want to increase the debt limit and Democrats do. So this is becoming a bit of a game. Like, is it Republicans trying to play a game to defame the other party, trying to make them look bad, using it as a political thing to try and get back power for 2024, to see the Democrats want to just increase spending. It doesn't make any sense, and Republicans are trying to put it that they want to balance the books. Like, so this is an issue that's going to be going on, and it's potentially a very, very serious issue, as we can see with other countries in the past that have defaulted on their debts, and we're going to go through a couple of them as well. But as I just go through this article even more, Biden is struggling to secure his New Deal to transform the US economy, because also there is the US debt ceiling that needs to be increased in the next 2 weeks, so they will default. They also want to pass a $3.5 trillion infrastructure package for roads, railways, airports, all that kind of stuff as well. So it is just something that's going on at the moment. Republicans are against advanced spending, but Democrats are not. So yeah, this is something to keep in mind. This is something that's going to be huge over the next 2 weeks, and what's prompted me to make this video is just to explain that the US debt is about to potentially default. It could derail the whole world economy, and it's something to keep an eye on. But now we will just go and have a look at basically the other countries that have defaulted on their debt in the past. Right, so other countries that have defaulted on their debt, they have done it in recent times. So in recent times we have number 10, Ecuador, 2008. They defaulted on 3.2 billion, which is so minuscule to what the US has at over 28 trillion. But they in 2008, and it was followed by a couple of other countries too. Peru in 2000, 4.9 billion. Again, it's very, very small compared to what we have now. Uruguay in 2003, 5.7 billion. Ecuador again in 1999, 6.6. Jamaica in 7.9 in 2010. Jamaica again at 9.1 in 2013. We have Greece, which is one huge one in the Eurozone that is always in the news for this kind of stuff. And the size of their default was 42 billion. So that's the biggest by a long shot at the moment. And then also we have Russia in 1998 of 73 billion. Then followed on by Argentina of 82 billion in 2001. And Greece again in the most recent times in 2012 of a default of 261 billion. So Greece is basically the main one in Europe that is not able to manage its debt, but it just shows that defaults on debt are not uncommon. That they can be done by countries. It does happen, and it does result in like economic instability around the whole country. And it's not a very, very good thing to be doing. Like, is the US defaults, like, it could potentially be extremely bad for the US, and they might lose their power on the world economy and the dollar as a reserve currency. So, look, it's something to keep in mind. But it does happen, but mainly to a lot smaller countries than something like the United States of America to default on their debt. I know Russia defaulted, but that was when they were coming out of the USSR, and there's a lot of other issues there at the time. So yeah, so something to keep in mind as well, that it does happen to countries. Just where I'd like to finish this video is just looking at public debts all around the world. So there's a clock on Google where you can literally just look at any country, listed countries on this clock, and I'll just show you a countdown clock of the debt of that country. And so you can look in your own country. A lot of the Western countries are all involved in it, and it just shows you their debt to GDP ratio. Like, so some of them are pretty crazy, and some are pretty well run. Like, so we'll just have a quick little look at it as I look to finish out the video here. Right, so this is it. This is the world debt clock. So as you can see, like, these things are moving constantly. You look at a couple of ratios, some might stand out to you, but you want to look at which country is yours in particular. Like, so something that might stand out to you is Japan. So Japan has a national debt of 15 trillion compared to GDP of 5.4 trillion, which is 275%. They are by far the worst, but Japan's economy is another one that is experienced a lot of stagflation. So they haven't really grown since 1990 when they had their boom, and then they just had flat plateaus. So they have issues there as well with Japan, but they're extremely stable in what they're doing, like, and they're managing to meet all of their interest payments too. So another one we've here is Greece. So 250% is Greece, which is they're heavily in debt compared to their GDP. Here at home in Ireland, we're pretty good. We're just matched for matched. So like national debt 344 billion compared to GDP is 339 billion. Like, it's not the worst in the world, but we do have more debt than GDP, which is also, yeah, it's not too good. Then you have the likes of South Korea, where their GDP is 1.7 trillion, their national debt is 800, it's 45%. Like, so that's a very, very good ratio when you're looking at some of these countries. It's a very, very good ratio to have. Then you have like Nigeria, 24%, Norway, 50%. Portugal is another one of Europe that is high in debt of 173%. Russia, low at 18%, and Saudi Arabia at 19% too. So a lot of these European countries that suffered during 2008, like, they all have high debt loads compared to some of the more ones that weren't as affected as much. You have like Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, them kind of ones. They weren't as affected as much. Their debt load is a lot lower. But yeah, this is an interesting thing. If you do want to check it out, like, I'll link all of the sources of information that I've found to make this video. They'll all be linked down below. And just remember, guys, if you did like this video, remember to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It helps out an awful lot. We're getting towards that 500 subscribers. And remember to check out all the links down below if you want to get any bits of free Bitcoin at all with Nexo and BlockFi. So thanks, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.